Hi there, and welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight's story begins with a funeral. That never happened. The mourners gathered. The priest prepared his sermon. But when the casket was to be lowered into the ground, it was nowhere to be found, and no body. No clues. Just the chilling realization that someone had stolen the very evidence of death. When Hercule Poirot is called to unravel the mystery, he discovers a puzzle more twisted than anyone imagined, a tale of greed, deception, and a secret that refused to stay buried. Who would hide a funeral? And why? And what truth waits beneath the earth, waiting for Poirot to uncover? Stay with us till the end. And if you love mysteries where even the dead cannot rest, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Haunting Vales. Chapter 1. The Man Who Was Buried Alive. Thick as wool, rolling between the lampposts and drifting along the cobblestones like smoke from a dying fire. It was the kind of morning when the city seemed to hold its breath. In a small, perfectly tidy flat on Whitehaven Street, a man sat in stillness, his tea cooling beside him as his eyes traced the pages of the daily newspaper. Hercule Poirot, neat, composed, and sharp as ever, was not reading the headlines about politics or the markets. His gaze was fixed on the obituary column. Most readers skipped over it. Poirot never did. To him, the dead often whispered secrets about the living. His finger stopped on a small notice near the bottom of the page. In loving memory of Mr. Charles Halworth. Private funeral held. Rest in peace. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Private, he murmured. Always an interesting word. Across the room, Captain Hastings looked up from his breakfast. What's that, old man? Someone you know? Poirot folded the paper neatly and placed it on the table. Not personally, but this name, Charles Halworth, it is familiar to me. He wrote to me only 3 days ago. Hastings nearly dropped his cup. Wrote to you? 3 days ago? And now he's dead. Poirot nodded once. So it would appear. He opened a drawer and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. The handwriting was bold and slightly hurried, the kind of script that spoke of worry. Inside was a short letter. Poirot handed it to Hastings. Mr. Poirot, I have reason to believe that someone close to me intends me harm. I cannot be certain who it is, but I fear the danger is near. If anything should happen to me, please do not accept the manner of my death without question. Something is wrong, terribly wrong. Yours sincerely, Charles Halworth. Hastings frowned as he read. Good heavens. Sounds like he knew something was coming. Poirot nodded slowly. Indeed. And now, 3 days later, we are told he has died, and that the funeral has already been held. Too fast, too convenient. Hastings, when a man who fears murder suddenly dies and vanishes into the ground within 2 days, the smell is not of lilies. It is of deceit. By noon, they were traveling through the countryside towards Surrey, where the Halworth estate lay among old trees and overgrown hedges. The house was large, gloomy, and silent. A caretaker answered the door, a man with a nervous look and hands that trembled as he wrung his cap. Yes, sir. Mr. Charles Halworth has passed. Buried yesterday. His brother, Mr. Edwin Halworth, handled everything himself. Ah, said Poirot softly. Would you be so kind as to tell us where the service took place? The caretaker hesitated. Well, sir, I couldn't say exactly. Mr. Edwin said it was to be private. Only family. No one here attended. Hastings frowned. You mean to say no one from the house went to the funeral? No, sir. Just Mr. Edwin and the undertaker, I think. He left early that morning, and by evening he said it was done. Poirot's dark eyes flicked upward toward the staircase. Might I see Mr. Charles's room? The caretaker looked uneasy but nodded. Yes, sir. Top of the stairs, third door. The room smelled faintly of tobacco and cedar. Everything was neat, untouched. Poirot moved with careful steps, studying the writing desk by the window. On it sat a half-empty ink bottle, a quill pen, and a blotter marked with fresh impressions. Poirot tilted the blotter toward the light. The ink is still damp in places, he said softly. Who writes when he is already dead? Hastings shifted uneasily. You think someone forged his letter? Poirot shook his head. No, Hastings. I think Charles Halworth was alive after the day he supposedly died. And I mean to know what happened next. He examined the drawers. Inside, he found a small notebook filled with accounts and notes. One page caught his eye. A list of names, some crossed out, one underlined twice. E.H. His brother, Hastings murmured. Poirot nodded. Yes, the brother who arranged the funeral. He replaced the notebook carefully and stood looking out the window. The curtains, Hastings, they have been drawn from within, not without. This window was opened recently. See the footprints below? Someone left, quietly, perhaps in the night. I think our Mr. Charles may have walked out of this house, quite alive. They returned to London that evening under a gray sky that threatened rain. The city lights shimmered through the mist. Poirot was silent on the journey home, his eyes distant, his mind racing through the pattern of events. When they arrived, he went straight to his desk and spread the newspaper clippings before him. Hastings, he said quietly, fetch the editions from 2 days before and the day after this notice appeared. Quickly, Hastings complied, setting a small stack of papers before him. Poirot flipped through them with precision. After a few minutes, he stopped. There, he said, a small report, buried among minor stories. Unidentified man found in the Thames near Richmond. Cause of death unknown. No papers found. Poirot tapped the headline. You see, Hastings? This report appeared the morning before the funeral notice. Too close to be coincidence. Hastings leaned over. You think that was Charles Halworth? Poirot's lips pressed together. I think it may have been the body used for the burial. The wrong man. Poirot nodded once. Exactly. The funeral was not to mourn the dead, but to hide the living. 2 mornings later, Inspector Barnaby from Scotland Yard arrived at Poirot's door. A large man with tired eyes. Barnaby had known Poirot long enough to listen, even when skeptical. Poirot, he said, shaking his head. You're telling me a man staged his own funeral? It's a bold claim. Poirot smiled faintly. I am telling you that someone wanted the world to believe Charles Halworth was dead, and someone helped make it happen. Barnaby sighed. All right then, what's your proof? Poirot gestured to the newspaper clippings, the letter, the fresh ink, the empty room. Pieces, my friend. All pieces. But put them together, and you see the picture forming. He leaned forward. We must find the undertaker who handled the supposed burial, and we must open the grave. The next afternoon, the 3 men, Poirot, Hastings, and Barnaby, stood in the small cemetery behind St. Jude's Church. A gravedigger worked silently, his spade cutting through the damp earth. The sky was gray again, the air heavy with the scent of rain. When the lid of the coffin was pried open, the inspector let out a low whistle. The body inside was badly decomposed, but even in that state, one thing was clear. The face was not that of Charles Halworth. Good Lord, Hastings whispered that Poirot's eyes remained calm. As I said, the funeral was for a man who was never meant to be mourned. The inspector turned to Poirot. Then where's the real Halworth? Poirot looked down at the coffin. That, my friend, is what we shall find next. But first, we must speak again to his brother. When they returned to the Halworth estate that evening, Edwin Halworth looked pale and weary. He stood by the fireplace, a drink trembling in his hand. Mr. Halworth, Poirot said quietly, we have opened your brother's grave. The man flinched. You had no right, no right. Poirot stepped forward, his tone even but unyielding. A man writes to me fearing for his life, and days later, his brother buries a stranger under his name. You will forgive me if I seek the truth. Edwin's eyes darted toward the window. His lips trembled. I didn't kill him. I didn't. Then where is he? Poirot asked. Tell us, and tell us truly. Edwin sank into a chair, his voice cracking. I don't know. He left that night. Said he had proof that someone was plotting to ruin him. and that if anything happened, I was to act as if he were dead. He said it was the only way to protect himself. Did you believe him? Poirot asked softly. At first, yes. But then I began receiving letters, and signed, threatening me, telling me to keep the secret, or my brother would be gone for real. Poirot's gaze sharpened. So someone else knew of his plan. Someone who used it. Edwin nodded weakly. Yes, and now I think they've taken him. Poirot looked out the window into the dark, quiet night. Mr. Halworth, he said, I believe you are telling part of the truth. But there is more. And until we find your brother, this mystery will not rest. As they left the house, the first drops of rain began to fall. Poirot stopped under the carriage lamp and looked back toward the manor. The case of the missing funeral, he murmured. It is not a story of death, Hastings. It is a story of disappearance. A man who tried to vanish, and someone who made sure he succeeded. Hastings frowned. And where do we begin looking? Poirot's eyes glinted in the dim light. At the river, my friend. Always the river. For that is where the dead and the living both leave their secrets. He turned, his coat brushing against the fog, and they walked into the London night, the sound of the rain following close behind. Chapter 2. The Grave with No Name. The rain had been falling over London for 2 days, a cold, steady drizzle that turned the streets into rivers of silver. In his tidy flat on Whitehaven Street, Hercule Poirot stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the gray world outside. Captain Hastings sat by the fire, restless, his newspaper untouched, still no sign of Charles Halworth. Hastings said, breaking the silence. The police have searched his homes, his offices, his clubs. Everywhere. It's as if he vanished. Poirot turned slowly. Men do not vanish, Hastings. They are hidden, by others or by themselves. A missing man always leaves a trail, if one knows how to look. He moved to his desk and spread out the collected newspapers and notes. Let us consider the facts. A man fearing for his life, a letter written to me. Reported dead 2 days later, a secret funeral. And now a body found in the river. Unidentified, but wearing Charles Halworth's ring. There is deceit layered upon deceit, and one truth buried beneath the rest. Hastings rubbed his temples. And that note, meet tonight. It points to something happening by the river. But what? Poirot tapped the newspaper. We must follow the trail of the living. Hastings, for the dead cannot speak. Yet the living often betray themselves. The next morning, they visited a small tailor's shop in Kensington. The coat found on the river's body was custom-made, and the tailor remembered it well. Made for a Mr. William Kent, he said, peering over his spectacles. Tall, fair hair, gray eyes. Paid in cash, came twice, and then vanished. Hastings frowned. Kent. Never heard of him. Poirot nodded. We shall find him, or the remains of his plans. The tailor's address led them to a small boarding house on Marlow Street. The landlady was a sharp-eyed woman with a habit of noticing everything. William Kent, she said, remembering instantly. Rented the top room. Always kept to himself. Only one visitor, a younger man, sharp suit, dark hair. They argued once. I heard Kent shout, I won't go through with it. The man said, you can't back out now. That was the last time I saw Kent alive. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Excellent, Hastings. We are close. That evening, they returned to the Halworth estate. Edwin Halworth, pale and uneasy, met them in the dimly lit sitting room. Mr. Halworth, Poirot began calmly. Does the name William Kent mean anything to you? Edwin's eyes widened for a split second. No, I've never heard of him. Poirot placed a photograph on the table. This man, found dead near the river, wearing your brother's ring. Edwin paled. I didn't know. I only followed instructions. I thought it was Charles. I had no idea. Poirot leaned forward. You arranged a funeral for a man who was never meant to be mourned. That is your mistake. Edwin's hands shook. I only obeyed. I swear it. Poirot's eyes were steady. Perhaps. But the dead and the living are not so easily fooled. You must now answer for your choices. The next morning, Poirot and Hastings visited the offices of Halworth and Company. Papers were stacked meticulously, files alphabetically labeled. A photograph on the wall confirmed it. Charles Halworth had met William Kent shortly before the incident. Arguments, threats, and deceit had culminated in Kent's death and Charles's disappearance. Later, a telegram arrived, and signed. You are looking for a man who no longer exists. Stop digging. The river keeps its secrets. Poirot smiled faintly. They believe I will stop. They are wrong. By afternoon, they were back at the river. Poirot examined the muddy banks carefully. Hastings, look. Shoe impressions, fine leather, narrow cut, recent. Not a laborer's. Hastings squinted. Could be anyone. No, Hastings. I have seen this pattern before. It belongs to Charles Halworth. He was here, either before or after Kent's death. Later that evening, they visited the undertaker's warehouse. The coffin, supposedly containing Charles, had been delivered there, not to the estate. Crates lined the walls, and a shadow moved among them that a man stepped forward. Thin, unshaven, eyes wide. Charles Halworth himself. Hastings gasped. Good heavens, he's alive. Charles trembled. You shouldn't have come. It's not safe. Poirot's voice was calm, steady. On the contrary, Mr. Halworth. It is time for truth. Tell us everything. Charles explained. Kent had blackmailed him. They met by the river. An accident occurred. Kent died. Charles switched coats, allowing his brother to arrange a funeral for a body that wasn't him, creating the illusion of death to protect himself. Poirot nodded. The grave with no name will soon have one, but the living must face the consequences of their choices. Chapter 3. The Funeral That Never Was. The fog lay heavy over London that night, curling along the cobblestone streets and slipping through the lamplit alleyways like a pale, silent tide. Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings walked in tense silence, their footsteps muted against the wet stones. Every detail of the case had been turned over and over in Poirot's mind, yet the final truth, the story of the missing funeral, still waited to be fully revealed. They arrived at the warehouse by the riverfront. The doors, chained days ago, were now slightly ajar, creaking eerily as they pushed them open. Inside, crates and boxes were stacked haphazardly, shadows moving with every flicker of the lantern Poirot carried. A faint, almost imperceptible shuffle echoed from the corner. The figure stepped forward. Charles Halworth. His coat was damp, his eyes wide with fear, and his hands shook slightly. You shouldn't have come, Charles whispered. It's not safe. Poirot's voice was calm, steady, unwavering. On the contrary, Mr. Halworth. The only danger is in hiding the truth. Speaking it is the safest path. Charles sank into a chair, exhausted. William Kent. He blackmailed me. He knew everything. The debts, the investments, every error I ever made. I went to meet him by the river to pay him off. And then he attacked me. He slipped, struck his head, and died. Hastings' eyes widened. Good heavens. And the body in the river, that was Kent. Yes, Charles said quietly. I panicked. I switched coats with him, left the body, and allowed my brother to arrange the funeral. The world thought I was dead. I only wanted to protect everyone. But I miscalculated. The funeral became a lie that trapped us all. Poirot's sharp eyes studied him. Deception can shield, but it also imprisons. Every lie leaves a mark. Now, the truth must be faced, whatever the consequences. The next morning, Poirot gathered everyone at the Halworth estate. Edwin Halworth, pale and trembling, waited in silence. Inspector Barnaby watching with his usual solemnity. Poirot spoke, precise and deliberate. We have traced every detail, from the river to the warehouse, from the coffin to the offices, from letters to threats. William Kent is dead. Charles Halworth staged his disappearance. Edwin, you unknowingly assisted in a funeral for a man who is not deceased. The truth is now before you all. Edwin's hands shook. I, I only followed instructions. I did not know. Poirot inclined his head. Now you know. Every act, every lie, every carefully orchestrated step is accounted for. Justice will follow, tempered with understanding, but the truth has emerged. Charles continued, voice barely audible. Kent's death was an accident. I acted out of fear, for myself, for my family. I never intended harm, but I could not return to the world immediately. I thought hiding would protect everyone, but it only caused confusion and pain. Poirot nodded. Fear drives men to desperate measures. But concealment can never last forever. Truth has a way of finding its path, no matter how tangled the web. Hastings shook his head. A funeral that never was. And yet so much revealed. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. Indeed, Hastings. And this tale reminds us, as it reminds our audience, that appearances deceive, and even the most elaborate plans cannot hide the human heart. Every detail matters. Every observation counts. He looked out toward the misty city, calm, reflective, as if speaking both to Hastings and those who had followed the case. And so ends the story of the missing funeral. A man thought dead, a family deceived, and yet the truth uncovered by careful observation and patience. If you enjoyed unraveling this mystery, don't stop here. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another suspenseful detective tale. Every mystery is a new adventure, and every clue could change everything.